Good morning and welcome to the thousands of students joining us from up and down the country for this Romeo and Juliet live lesson. A big shout out to Blatchington Mill Sixth Form and School, Hall Green School and Kingsmead Technology College and everyone else who is watching. We are coming to you live from our studio theatre here in Stratford-upon-Avon. And the other people joining me in the studio are Claire Edwards, our BSL interpreter. Click on the BSL button on the screen if you want to watch our signed feed. And Erica Whyman, the Deputy Artistic Director of the RSC and Director of our recent production of Romeo and Juliet. Karen Fishwick, who played Juliet, and Andrew French, who played Friar Laurence. Please do send in any questions to Erica and the actors via the tab on the website or tweet us at #RSCRomeo or email them to us. It would be great as well to have pictures of you watching in your classrooms. The email is schoolsbroadcast@rsc.org.uk. Now, for the next hour, we are going to show you how at the RSC we start to unpick Shakespeare and the sorts of things that happen in our rehearsal rooms. Some of you might already be studying Romeo and Juliet for your GCSEs, or you might be about to study the play, but hopefully you will have all looked at the preparation packs. And for this morning, we're going to assume that you all know the story and have some knowledge of the characters. Make sure you have the text from the packs ready, as we will be doing some close, critical reading of the scenes. But don't worry if you haven't got them. So, let's get going. Good morning, Erica.
Good morning, Sophie.
Good morning. Now, I think a lot of people assume that at the RSC, actors and directors come to the rehearsal room with a deep knowledge of Shakespeare and know all there is to know about the play. Actually, they come with a lot of questions. And as a company, how do you go about beginning to answer some of those questions?
Yes, that's absolutely right, because even if we know the play quite well or we've seen it or worked on it before, it is 400 years old. So we've got a job to do to make sure that we're familiar with it and we can communicate that to an audience that might be coming to it for the first time. We do lots of things, but primarily we read it. We read it out loud to each other. We ask each other what we think it means. We look things up when we need to. We might put things into our own words just to test that we've understood them. And I suppose what we're really doing is making choices, both as the director about what the production's going to look like and feel like, and as actors about the characters. What choices do we make based on the clues we find in Shakespeare's text? So we're looking for evidence in the play. So in a way, we're in exactly the same position as a student studying the text.
Absolutely. And of course, we need to think about what this play means to us today. Can you tell us some of your thoughts about staging it now and how it's relevant to us in our society?
Well, actually, the play has felt very relevant, very close to our times, which seems amazing because it was written so long ago. It's essentially about young people, of course, and young people who don't necessarily feel like they've got a voice. Romeo and Juliet are not allowed to be together by the adults in their lives, and I've always felt that they've been let down by those adults, particularly the parents in their life. And also it's a play that's about violence. So there is, of course, on Shakespeare's stage, they would have used swords, but replacing them with knives in our production immediately meant that we could see, sadly, the kind of violence that we still see on our streets sometimes now. So it feels like it's a play really about a kind of revolution where the young people, through falling in love, this amazing love story, try and make a change in their society that is really necessary, and that feels still relevant today as it did then.
Fantastic. Thank you, Erica. Now, we are joined by Karen and Andrew, now Karen's been playing Juliet and Andrew's been playing the Friar for over a year now. Now, what were your first impressions of these characters, Karen?
I thought I totally knew who Juliet was. It's such a famous character. You see all these images of her on balconies and sort of wearing floaty night dresses, flowers in her hair and all that sort of stuff. So I thought, oh yeah, she's floaty and a bit naive. I thought she would be strong for everything that she goes through, but I wasn't really that sure of all her strengths quite yet.
And Andrew, how about you in the Friar?
Well, although he has a lot of lines in the play, I didn't know that much about him. I did a little research, and I was surprised to see how much he says and how much of the plot he'd ride stage. So I thought I'd understand him. I originally thought he was powerful and wise and, you know, sort of balanced.
And you say originally thought that. Has that opinion changed?
Oh, gosh, yes. I realise now that he's not wise at all. He thinks he is, but he keeps on making mistakes. That he's not balanced. He keeps on making incredibly passionate decisions. He thinks he wants to discover things through his mind, but actually a lot of his decisions come through his heart. And he's powerless in the face of fate and how things are designed to happen by the gods. So yes, he's powerless as well.
Great. And Karen, similarly for you, has that opinion changed of Juliet?
Oh yeah, I've learned so much. She is such a strong woman. Yes, I sort of went the opposite direction of Andrew in that I found she had heaps and heaps of power, and actually she is usually, as much as you can try to be, the most collected and forward-thinking person in the scene, despite being one of the youngest characters. She's still impatient, but she is super smart, and yeah, just extremely courageous as well.
Thank you. So now we're going to look at two scenes from the play. Erica, can you tell us a bit about why it's important to look at these two scenes and why they're good for us to explore?
Yes, so they're two scenes from Juliet's journey. We're going to look at a soliloquy that Karen does and then a duologue between the friar and Juliet. So that's interesting because, as Karen says, actually the character of Juliet can be very surprising. I know that probably both of us wanted to find those strengths in her, but we really did in Shakespeare's words. So we'll be able to see some of the evidence for that. But they're also really different. One of them is a bit earlier in the play in Act 3, where it's a very exciting moment, very passionate moment. And then the scene we'll look at with the friar from a bit later in Act 4 is really a very difficult moment for Juliet, perhaps the lowest moment in the play. So we can see some of the contrast and how the action unfolds in the course of the play.
Fantastic. So can we now look at how you might approach these scenes in the rehearsal rooms? Now, in your classroom, grab your copies of Act 3, Scene 2, so you can follow along. Over to you.
Thank you very much. So we've been working on this speech for a long time, sometimes called Gallop Apace, at the very beginning of Act 3, Scene 2. It's an amazing piece of text, right? And there's so much in it. But one thing that we ought to kind of remember is that you're talking directly to the audience, which you've probably got used to. Yes. But how does it feel to do that? That's something that Shakespeare loved to do, Elizabethan playwrights loved to do, to talk really immediately to the audience. What's that like?
Yeah, I loved doing that as an actress. Sort of speaking directly to the audience is the best way for you to sort of learn the characters' inner thoughts, their truest colours, because there is no one else around, especially for Juliet, who's only 13, her parents aren't around, the nurse isn't around, there's no points of authority, so she can just be by herself. As an actress, I sort of chose to do it a few different ways, so while I directly address the audience, I find she's also talking to herself, she's talking to the night sky, she's talking to Romeo, so that was always a challenge, but for me makes it more colourful and interesting, of showing her excitement of all the different points she's sort of trying to cover all at the same time because she's so excited.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I wonder, could you remind us what's happened to her in the play? So a huge amount has happened in a very short space of time.
Yeah.
Where did you meet Romeo?
So we met at the party. They'd been living her normal life till then, met Romeo unexpectedly at the party, fell completely, deeply in love with him, and that same night he came and broke into her garden. The balcony scene happened, and they had this amazing connection, and they decided, oh, if this is the real deal, then we should probably get married, which has happened earlier this day. So they've gone to Friar Laurence's cell, got married secretly. And now she's in her room, waiting for Romeo to arrive so that they can spend their first night together as husband and wife.
So it's an extraordinary moment for the audience because although Juliet doesn't know this, we know that Romeo's just killed Tybalt.
Yes.
So we get this huge kind of dramatic irony of having this very violent, very upsetting and unexpected scene. And then immediately this person who, as you say, is full of expectation and possibility. And let's have a look at it. I wonder if you can cast your mind back quite a long way to maybe early rehearsals where we would perhaps just deliver it quite simply, concentrate on talking to the night, as you say, and let the language unfold and see what we discover.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's do that, Gallop apace, you fiery-footed steeds towards Phoebus' lodging. Such a wagoner as Phaeton would whip you to the west and bring in cloudy night immediately. Spread thy close curtain, love-performing night, that runaways' eyes may wink and Romeo leap to these arms untalked of and unseen. Lovers can see to do their amorous rites by their own beauties, or if love be blind, it best agrees with night. Come, civil night, thou sober-suited matron, all in black, and learn me how to lose a winning match played for a pair of stainless maidenhoods. Come night, come Romeo, come thou day and night, for thou wilt lie upon the wings of night, whiter than new snow upon a raven's back. Come, gentle night, come loving, black-browed night. Give me my Romeo, and when I shall die, take him and cut him out in little stars, and he will make the face of heaven so fine that all the world will be in love with night and pay no worship to the garish sun.
Oh, it's lovely. It's lovely hearing it like that.
It's strange, but
yeah.
it's different.
It does have a kind of simple innocence about it, doesn't it? And it's like she's talking to a best friend or something, an invisible friend.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could try and go back over some of the things we discovered in rehearsals. I know we took a lot longer than this, but there are lots of tactics Shakespeare uses, right, to animate this language and to give you clues about different moods and different images. I wonder if, first of all, we talk about the very beginning, because in a way it's the most difficult bit, right? There's a kind of a reference there that we might not all know.
Yes.
So in Gallop Apace, he talks about Phoebus, the sun god of the sun, and Phoebus' son Phaeton, and the famous story that Shakespeare would have known about Phaeton driving his father's carriage, driving the sun carriage across the sky. Yeah. What's it like to have that in your mind as you're saying those lines?
Yeah, I remember the first time reading it and going, I just don't know how we can make sense of this for me as an actress, but also Juliet, who's 13 years old. I mean, how does she come up with stuff like that? But I suppose for me, it's building an image for myself in my mind that makes it clear. So gallop apace, literally move faster. She's willing everything to... She needs everything as soon as physically possible. You fiery-footed steeds, imagining, literally seeing the image of the horse in my mind, running so fast that its feet catches fire. It's such a poetic, massive image. But if I can at least see that, it makes it much clearer for me to sort of feel the adrenaline rushing through her body.
And then immediately there's a choice, isn't there, about becoming impatient and commanding. Because we should have said that Phaeton drops to the earth in flames. So actually it's a kind of really dramatic image. So it starts the speech with real energy. Yeah. And then I thought we might just talk about another image that's a completely different tone. So a little bit later, you say, "Come civil night, thou sober-suited matron, all in black." What do you see when you say that line?
Yes, sober-suited matron, for me, I sort of imagine this huge sort of doom figure in the sky. I don't know if it's a person, it doesn't really have a face, but it's the idea of some person of authority up there. A matron feels like a teacher, head teacher or something like that. Someone that you don't really mess around with, someone that you don't ask favours of or speak to that often, but she's choosing this time now to ask this foreboding figure a question. Now is the time to teach me. I won't ask much, but please, can you help me with this thing, this intimate thing?
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's so different to the beginning of the speech.
Yes.
So instead of this big commanding the gods, commanding the sky, as you say, it's quite polite. And again, there is a kind of humility and I think a maturity in asking this authority figure to come and help you with, as you say, how to spend your first night with your husband. It's an amazingly intimate thing to ask. So the speech really changes there. I wonder if you would mind doing an exercise that I think we did a long time ago, which is just say for us or read out for us the last word of every line, because the last word in a line of verse is often, in a sense, the most important, or we hear the meaning, don't we, of the speech by hearing those, and we hear other tactics that Shakespeare uses like rhyme and rhythm and so on. Would that be all right, just to hear the last words?
Okay, so last words. Steeds, wagoner, west, immediately, night, Romeo, unseen, right, blind, night, black, match, maidenhoods, night, back, night, die, stars, fine, night, sun.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's like a spell almost, isn't
Yeah.
it? This sense of conjuring the night in so many different ways. And Romeo and Juliet, of course, have lots of references to this kind of slight, as you said, foreboding sense of death in that night. And then suddenly the garish sun comes out of those images.
Just at the very end. Yeah. Amazing.
We've talked a bit about this already, but I wonder, are there other moments here which you worked on early on in terms of the sounds of the language that help you?
Yeah, that was crucial, really. It's amazing how tiny little things can make such a difference. For example, the alliteration that's sort of peppered throughout it, the fiery-footed steeds to Phaeton. Just hearing that just makes it feel a little bit more alive, and the wagoner that will whip you to the west, it just makes everything sort of tumble on, and the whip, that seems like such a quick action to sort of, you can feel like everything moving much faster. And even and saying the word Romeo and trying to find the vowel sounds in that to sort of colour it, and that she really loves saying the Romeo instead of just a throwaway word. It makes it much more precious.
It really matters, yeah. And the last thing just to pull out is we've talked a bit about the big dramatic antithesis of what's happened before with Tybalt dying, which of course Juliet doesn't know, so this huge contrast that you have to sort of hold.
Yes.
But inside the language there's antithesis as well. To lose a winning match is quite a useful one.
Yep.
That sense of holding both ideas in your head in that line in equal balance. So when something changes, you lose something and you gain something.
Yeah.
Shall we try and put all that together and see if we can find more differences in the speech, more choices about the mood and the tone, and really enjoy that tasty language?
Yeah, love to.
Great. Thanks, Karen.
Gallop apace, you fiery-footed steeds, towards Phoebus' lodging. Such a wagoner as Phaeton would whip you to the west and bring in cloudy night immediately. Spread thy close curtain, love performing night, that runaways' eyes may wink, and Romeo, leap to these arms untalked of and unseen. Lovers can see to do their amorous rites by their own beauties, or if love be blind, it best agrees with night. Come, civil night, thou sober, suited matron all in black, and learn me how to lose a winning match played for a pair of stainless maidenhoods. Come night, come Romeo, come thou day and night, for thou wilt lie upon the wings of night, whiter than new snow upon a raven's back. Come, gentle night, come loving black-browed night, give me my Romeo, and when I shall die, take him and cut him out in little stars, and he will make the face of heaven so fine that all the world will be in love with night and pay no worship to the garish sun.
That's gorgeous. Thank you very much. That was brilliant. It just felt so different because you can feel all these changes in it and the corners you take. And then, in a way, I think the cheekiest thing Shakespeare does is lead you with that momentum to that amazing sense of commanding the sky. And we start to believe Romeo is actually going to come. I think we forget that the next contrast is you're going to go into a scene where you have to find out the truth, that he's not going to come tonight.
Yeah, it feels exciting for me, so you would hope it would be engaging to listen to.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, both of you. That was fantastic. So we see Juliet in this private moment coming straight off the back of a very violent scene. It's a completely contrasting moment. Shakespeare seems to do this a lot throughout the play. Do notice when you're studying it, these moments of antithesis, when opposite things sit side by side or follow on very, very quickly. So let's move on to look at the second scene. Now, this is at the start of Act 4. Juliet goes to Friar Laurence to seek help. She has been told by her father that she must marry Paris, and if not, she will be cast out by her family. So now we are joined by Andrew and Erica. Back over to you.
Thank you very much. Andrew, would you just talk a little bit about what you think the effect the friar has in the play? What's Shakespeare up to with the friar?
Yeah, I think he has a great effect in one sense, in that lots of the plot points come from him. He's pushed into a place where he has to create these moments. But I think Shakespeare is asking about the power of religion compared to the world of men. But he's also analysing, I think, a different type of parent. The Friar refers to Romeo as son very quickly. He refers to Juliet as daughter very quickly. He's a man who doesn't have any children, but he clearly is a father figure, a parent figure in the play, and he's a different type of parent compared to Juliet's real parents and Romeo's real parents, in that he's more open and he listens. And maybe Shakespeare's sort of suggesting perhaps there's a different way for generations to communicate. And of course, sometimes there are confusions, but sometimes there's real clarity and honesty and truth between them.
Yeah, and I mean, that's one way in which we all found the play to be more modern than you might think 400 years later, that actually Shakespeare's exploring how you might change relationships between parents and children. Yeah, great. So a lot has happened to him. Just a quick recap. Romeo's told him that he's fallen in love with Juliet, asked you to marry them. You've married them in secret, for which you could get into some trouble, right?
Yeah, real trouble. And it shows how the elder generation is... It's not just the older generation telling the younger generation what to do, but that the actions of the younger generation have an effect, not just on the world, but on the older generation too. So he is affected by them. When you first see him, he's very sort of calm and balanced. And every time Romeo comes in, it throws him off. When Juliet comes in, she throws him off. You know, they don't do what he expects them to do. Yeah. There's something really interesting about that. So in the scene we're about to see, just before that, Paris has said, so I'm going to marry Juliet, and that's great. And he, in our production, gives her a little kiss and goes off. And then Juliet and Friar Laurence have to deal with the situation of the fact that she's already married. They're the only people who know what are we going to do next.
And Romeo has been banished. So
Yes.
Romeo is gone. So this terrible secret lies with you. Can I ask you, if it's possible, if you had to describe Juliet in 3 words at this point in the play, how would you do that?
I think I'd probably say desperate, demanding. And the last word, fearless, probably.
Yeah, great. And Andrew, the Friar, 3 words to describe him?
At this moment in the play, I think he is... he's loving, again, still, and he wants to... I think he's loving and... upset because he doesn't know what to do, and he's desperately sort of thinking of a possible other plan. I mean, that's the thing. He doesn't really... He only thinks in the moment. It often happens with Shakespeare that, you know, the people are being affected by the words that they're said right to them at that moment.
Yes.
So in that moment, he's having to think very, very quickly.
Yes, because often people have asked us, has he got this plan in advance? We don't think so. It happens as he speaks. He doesn't have a chance.
We did a moment in our production where just after Romeo's gone, he suddenly goes, wait a minute, that plan might not work, but it's too late. That thing of, you know, the actions are moving faster than the humans can move.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Thank you. So please could you get out your Act 4, Scene 1 extract. Now, one of the first things that a company often does is to break the play down into sections, ignoring scenes and acts, but into sections of the story, beats, in which important things happen or show how the story develops. So can you tell us about the beats that you found in this scene when rehearsing?
Yes, I mean, casting our minds back to that, I think what we did was think that the scene started with a moment of empathy. So the friar is expressing that he understands how upset Juliet is. And then from that, she goes on to ask him very directly, like Karen was saying, about demanding something. She demands that he helps her. And then we had a sense, as Andrew referred to, of the friar starting to have some kind of plan, quite tentatively. And then we had a beat where he explains that plan. But I think we might try and show you that in that understanding of 4 story beats, we probably missed one that was really key.
Well, let's show you how we started to work on it in rehearsals.
Thank you. So if we can try and go back to imagining that was the sort of focus for us of how upset Juliet was and how you weren't really sure how you were going to fix it. And we concentrate on that emotional relationship between them. Thank you.
Oh, shut the door. And when thou hast done so, come weep with me. past hope, past care, past help.
Oh, Juliet, I already know thy grief. It strains me past the compass of my wits.
Tell me not, Friar, that thou hearest of this, unless thou tell me how I may prevent it. If in thy wisdom thou canst give no help, do thou, but call my resolution wise. And with this knife, I will help it presently. God joined my heart and Romeo's, thou our hands, and ere this hand by thee to Romeo sealed shall be the label to another deed, or my true heart, with treacherous revolt, turn to another, this shall slay them both.
Hold, daughter. I do spy a kind of hope which craves as desperate an execution as that is desperate which we would prevent. If, rather than to marry County Paris, thou hast the strength of will to slay thyself, then is it likely thou wilt undertake a thing like death to chide away this shame? And if thou darest, I'll give thee remedy.
Oh, bid me leap rather than marry Paris from off the battlements of any tower, or hide me nightly in a charnel house, overcovered quite with dead men's rattling bones. Things that to hear them told have made me tremble, and I will do it without fear or doubt, to live an unstained wife to my sweet love.
Hold then. Go home. Be merry, give consent to marry Paris. Wednesday is tomorrow. Tomorrow night, look that thou lie alone. Take thou this vial, being then in bed, and this distilling liquor drink thou off, when presently through all thy veins shall run a cold and drowsy humour, for no pulse shall keep his native progress, but surcease. No warmth, no breath shall testify thou liv'st, and in this borrowed likeness of shrunk death, thou shalt continue 42 hours, and then awake, as from a pleasant sleep.
That's lovely, you two, thank you very much. It's very tender like that, isn't it? And there is all of that in it, like you were saying. He's very kind, he's very loving, and she does need to be comforted.
Yes.
I wonder if we could just do a kind of accelerated version of what we would spend lots of time on in rehearsals, of which words or phrases you each really want the other character to understand. Which ones leap out for you now, thinking about that scene?
There's plenty for me. Shut the door, help me prevent it, knife, treacherous revolt.
Yes. This knife, let's talk about that for a second, because that's incredibly important, isn't it? That she is carrying a knife. Yeah. So she is threatening. So she's threatening in real time that she could hurt herself. And actually, the last line of the scene before, just when you come out of this terrible row with your father, can you remind us of that last line of Act 3, Scene 5?
Yes, if all else fail, myself have power to die.
And it's a very straightforward line. You can really hear her courage in it, but also it's a really dangerous line. So, of course, we don't want any young person to be feeling that. But when Shakespeare was writing it, it would also be sacrilegious to consider the idea of killing yourself. So that's a very dangerous thing to bring in to the friar's cell. Yeah. And treacherous revolt, just to pick out, that's very extreme, isn't it? She means, would you explain what she means about what could happen to her heart?
Yes,
or?
she's terrified that her heart is going to completely betray her. It's like it's going to burst out her chest and run away, and she can't do anything about it. And just the feeling of that betrayal, I think, is just completely gut-wrenching to her. And at this point, it's the only thing she sort of has left.
It's really extreme, isn't it? Yeah. And Andrew, what leaps for you?
Hold.
Yes.
I mean, it's always interesting in Shakespeare, I find anyway, that to look, when you're doing speeches, to look at the words that are repeated.
Yes.
So he says hold twice. He says desperate twice, slightly different ways. Breath suddenly struck out just then when I was saying it. And remedy. Yeah. There's a sort of medicinal, sort of doctor, sort of herbal type of aspect to his character. Yeah. But in this version, it's not about medicine. It's about something that will be very much like death. Yeah. And so there's something quite nice about that sort of, remedy. So I'll remedy a situation. I will give you something that will make you actually look like you are sick or dead in order to help you.
And it's interesting because he is, again, straying into something magical and mystical and perhaps not above board. But if it's a remedy, it's healing, isn't it? And so there's something positive about that. And again, you call her daughter, just noticing what you said earlier. Yeah, that's great. The beat that I was referring to, I think we really discovered something in rehearsals around "Oh, bid me leap" and that speech. Would you say, Karen, a little bit about the images that come in that speech?
Yes.
And what they mean to you?
Yeah, they're huge, really. Sort of Juliet finding new ways to describe what she will do if she has to marry Paris. So bid me leap off the battlements of any tower. This idea of sort of throwing herself off a building, basically. But the word leap, I think, is essential. She's not going to step off. She's not going to drop off. She will happily throw herself with all her might. The idea of her starting so high and sort of plummeting to the ground, but then leading on to being buried in a charnel house, which is where they held bodies before they were buried. Covered in dead men's rattling bones. She would literally rather be sort of enveloped in corpses. And the rattling bones makes you feel like these bodies are not fully dead yet, because they're still moving. And the images are just sort of horror, really, a bit nightmarish.
Yeah. But she finishes that speech by quite straightforwardly saying that she's not afraid of those things. These terrifying things, she is prepared for any of it, if it can save her from marrying Paris.
Yeah.
So I guess my memory is that we had sort of hit a moment of realising that fearlessness was really extraordinary and was a real motor in the scene. I think you used the word, it inspires the friar.
I mean, the strength of the imagery, I think it frightens him. It doesn't frighten her, but it frightens him, that recalling of death, that recreating of sort of, as you say, dead men's rattling bones. Like, it makes me think of like bones coming out from the grave and moving around. There's something scary about that, but it's her strength and her intelligence that makes him go, if you're that brave, if you're that courageous, if you're going to do that thing, then I can't be weak, I can't be scared. I've got to be as brave. She forces him to go to the most difficult, dangerous idea. She's incredibly inspirational.
Yes, and as a director, that was a very exciting moment, because we're in Act 4, we've been in the theatre for a while. We need the action to keep moving, to feel like there's suspense in it and there's excitement in it. Can we try it, trying to deploy all of those tactics, all of those great words, and what happens between you? Thank you.
Oh, shut the door. And when thou hast done so, come weep with me, past hope, past care, past help.
Oh, Juliet, I already know thy grief. It strains me past the compass of my wits.
Tell me not, friar, that thou hearest of this, unless thou tell me how I may prevent it. If in thy wisdom thou canst give no help, do thou but call my resolution wise, and with this knife I will help it presently. God joins my heart and Romeo's, thou our hands, and ere this hand by thee to Romeo sealed shall be the label to another deed, or my true heart with treacherous revolt turn to another, this shall slay them both.
Hold, daughter! I do spy a kind of hope which craves as desperate an execution as that is desperate which we would prevent. If, rather than to marry County Paris, thou hast the strength of will to slay thyself, then is it likely thou wilt undertake a thing like death, to chide away this shame? And if thou darest, I'll give thee remedy.
Oh, bid me leap, rather than marry Paris from off the battlements of any tower, or hide me nightly in a charnel house o'ercovered quite with dead men's rattling bones, things that to hear them told have made me tremble. And I will do it without fear or doubt, to live an unstained wife to my sweet love.
Hold, then. Go home. Be merry. Give consent to marry Paris. Wednesday is tomorrow. Tomorrow night, look that thou lie alone. Take thou this vial, being then in bed, and this distilling liquor drink thou off. When presently through all thy veins shall run a cold and drowsy humour, for no pulse shall keep his native progress but surcease. No warmth, no breath shall testify thou livest, and in this borrowed likeness of shrunk death thou shalt continue 42 hours, and then awake, as from a pleasant sleep.
Oh, thank you so much, you two. That's great. It still upsets me, that scene.
Me too.
Because of her courage, actually. It's extraordinary. I heard so much more of the language and how it twists and turns. Of course, there is that tenderness and kindness, but there's also the need to go somewhere, like we were saying, that's really extreme, somewhere neither of them have ever been before. And it's interesting seeing a young person kind of lead an older person to that conclusion. I wonder if we could just talk about a couple of things that came out at me then. You mentioned, Andrew, those two uses of desperate. And it's something that Shakespeare does a lot, right? To get us to hear different meanings in the same word. I wonder if we could just try and say what the two are.
Yeah, I mean, desperate in that obvious sense of the word, we are at this place now where we have to do something, but also there's something that would be the sense of desperate being a thing that you don't want to do, like the marriage to Paris. That would be a desperate thing. Yeah. So we have to be desperate in order to prevent a desperate thing. Yeah. And the clever way that Shakespeare plays against words, you're right. Often in a line, you don't hear everything, but if you can hear that hook word in the middle and normally the last word, you get the sense if you have the right attitude.
Yes, we get the double meaning, but we also get this sense of the origins of the word in despair and the lack of hope. Yes. And we start to feel, I think, that she must not, on any account, marry Paris. No. The other one that really struck me just then was how straightforward, as we said, she gets at the end of the "Oh, bid me leap" speech. Yeah. She talks about being an unstained wife. Yes. This idea of not, in any sense, sinning against God. Yes. Which is very interesting when she's threatened to kill herself. But actually that means a lot to Juliet, doesn't it? This idea of doing right by her marriage.
Yes, I think so. I mean, I suppose the feeling of God always there. I mean, everyone else is sort of telling her what to do in her life, but God is sort of always there, and it's sort of the taking care of everything. How can she possibly... He's controlling the fate of everything in this place, so how could she possibly go wrong by that?
Yeah.
But that huge image compared to sweet love feels really small and delicate and personal.
Yes.
To the unstained feels like a huge statement.
Yeah. And we were talking about how epic Juliet's courage is, and that sort of sense of the poetic. So it's very small, like you say, and very real, and yet it's enormous. I mean, I think she's the most courageous person in the play. And I wonder, would you remind us of the last two lines you say when you kill yourself at the end?
Yes, so she picks up the dagger and goes, "Oh, happy dagger, this is thy sheath. There rust and let me die."
It's so simple. We think quite a lot, don't we, about how complex Shakespeare's language might be, and it is sometimes, you know, these wonderful flights of fancy and unfamiliar ideas, and then a line like that, it's so simple, it just speaks to us 400 years later. Mm-hmm. And that's the sort of death that in Elizabethan plays would be given to a Roman general, not to a young woman. This immediate, brief, brave, straightforward death. Mm-hmm. She's great, isn't she?
Yes, she's very good. She's very good.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was fantastic to see. So ultimately, we can see how the director and actors are working together to see how these words are being interpreted and how we bring it to life on the stage. We now know that they're discovering the play as they go, just like you are studying it in your classrooms. By using the text and the clues that Shakespeare has left us in the language, the actors are making decisions about the characters and the action of the play. Now, with these thoughts in your mind, it would be useful for you to look for these clues and use some of these techniques on the rest of the play. We've had some great photos come in from the Kingsley School, Helsdon High School and Christian Dean's Academy. And I wanted to finish by asking Erica, Andrew and Karen some questions that have been sent in from some students. So let's begin. Now, this first question is to Andrew. Why is the friar, a holy man, presented as someone willing to do something immoral? For example, creating a sleeping potion. And that comes in from Nunnery Wood High School from Lucy.
That's a good question, Lucy.
Yeah.
He does something that can be seen as immoral for the greater good. He believes that by doing a little sin, he can help protect and join his society, the community that he's in, together. The two families, Capulets and Montagues, who've been fighting for a very long time, we are told in the prologue. And he's been involved in that community, and he's seen all the violence, and he thinks if I just do this little sin, then there'll be peace. And so it's worth it. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one.
Fantastic. And Karen, a question to you has come in from Cottingham High School and Sixth Form from Noah. Why did Juliet have to kill herself? What did it achieve?
Yes, I mean, in the very last moments of the play, I suppose, Juliet and Romeo, they both have to die in order for there to be change in this society. If they didn't, I think the two households would have just continued to fight forever and ever and ever over Tybalt's death, over Mercutio's death. But specifically those two people coming together to fall in love and then to die is the only thing that heals the whole process, really.
And I guess thinking about that process as well, there's a question that's come in here about the prologue. Now, where is it? So it's about the start of the play, and I guess it's over to you, Erica, about why do you think Shakespeare opens the play with a prologue?
It's the most daring thing, I think, because he essentially tells you 2/3 of the story, maybe more, including the ending in the first 14 lines of the play. I think there's lots of things going on. I think he wants to tell us we're going to have a great evening, so he tells us it's going to be exciting, full of suspense. It's like a thriller. So there's something about just opening an amazing piece of theatre. But I think he's also making a really serious point, and actually Karen's already talked about it, well, Andrew's talked about it, that he's looking the audience in the eye and saying, imagine a world in which war won't stop, whether that's civil war or this immediate family feud. And unfortunately, just like in our time, Shakespeare's time, they would have known wars that went on and on. You couldn't break them. You couldn't find a way through them. And he looks the audience in the eye and says, there's only one thing that's going to change this, and that is the death of children. He calls them children, even though we know their ages, and both then and I think now, we see them as young people, young adults. In the prologue, he says, naught but their children's end. So nothing except the death of children is going to change the minds of these two families. So he's also telling us that this is the kind of grudge that is going to need an extreme event for it to go away and change.
Fantastic. And that question came in there from Ellie. And there's another brilliant question about this grudge. And this has come in from Sophia. And this is to all of you, really. Why were those two families, the Montagues and the Capulets, fighting? And a little bit about how the friar fits into that fight as well. So, Karen, I guess, first of all, why to you? Do you feel...
Anytime I've thought about this, I feel like I always land on the same thing, that they don't really know. Nobody actually knows. It goes back so far, which makes it even more trivial and heartbreaking, because maybe they can't remember it. It could be so many things, but it's never mentioned. I mean, there's lots of things you could imagine, but that makes it even more sort of tragic for me, that they're all fighting with their hearts and their brains, but they don't know why.
Shakespeare gives us lots of clues to that being right, I think. One, ancient grudge. He calls it an ancient grudge, so it sort of trivialises it, and at the same time it's been going on forever. Yeah. Then when the Prince Aeschylus talks about how fighting has broken out again, he talks about just an airy word, which is a great expression for how, just a silly little thing has triggered this fight again. So it doesn't refer to a big dilemma. They can't stop it. But I think maybe another answer I would give comes from a speech that Tybalt has in the party scene, Act 1, Scene 5. Because Tybalt says, "'Tis a shame," when he sees Romeo at the party. And I think this sense of honour and shame is very deep in these two families. And they've got their own logic to what is shameful, what is honourable. But that's really powerful, which I think is something that we can recognise when old wounds won't go away and you keep fighting. You become very ashamed of letting something go, so you have to fight back.
And Andrew,
I had a sense, thank you. I had a sense that he was from somewhere else. We tried to do that a little bit with Tom Piper, who was our designer, and that my costume it had a sort of slightly oriental, Eastern sort of yoga, Tai Chi sort of sense of somebody who'd been away. And that's why they can both listen to him. That's why they can both go to him. Capulet says, this Holy Father, he obviously has this reputation and standing in the community, and I think he can only get that because he's never been violent in front of these people, and he will listen to both sides. He is incredibly balanced, and so I think he's able to be slightly from the outside and go, don't do this, try not to do that. But of course, they keep on fighting. I think you're right. I think you're both right. That I think it was from something really, really small that somebody took offence at. And it reminded me a little bit of when I was younger and people used to step on your trainers. And you were like, something really small, and you were like, that's outrageous, you've offended me. Well, no, it's just some trainers. But, you know, it starts from that, and maybe it's grown over time, years and years and years of ancient grudge. And now it's just like, it doesn't matter, but we hate them. That's how we define ourselves. We hate them. That's how we know we are, and then vice versa for the other side.
Brilliant, thank you. So again, another question for all of you, and we're looking at one of the other characters in the play now, and this is from Abbots Hill School, from Scarlett. So thank you, Scarlett. Could Lady Capulet have supported Juliet more? Oh, good question, thank you.
Yes.
Yes, of course. But all of the characters could have behaved differently, I suppose you could argue. I feel like she's probably a creature of habit, and a lot of the time as Juliet I'd feel quite sorry for her. Even as Juliet, I feel like I could look at her and see her being helpless because of this society, how she was brought up in this society, everything that Juliet is going through. I think Lady Capulet went through a version of herself being married off and being a bit isolated, and not really having, I don't think her parents were brilliant with her either. So, yeah, I feel like she could have done more, but I suppose she didn't have the same strength to be able to help.
I'm really interested in this question because I think sometimes we can caricature Lady Capulet and think that she's either a villain in the play or weak. I think we get lots of evidence of what Karen is suggesting, that she's in a loveless marriage. We see no moment where Capulet and Lady Capulet are happy together. We know that she was married and had Juliet when she was 14, so now she's 28. She's still very young. Yeah. And I think also there's, in the nurse's speech in Act 1, we hear that she wasn't really allowed or permitted to bring up her own child, whether that was practical. We know that they were away in Mantua at one point when there was an earthquake. So this sense of being separated from her daughter when she was very small, which cannot have been easy, or at least would have made it hard for her to make a really strong relationship. And she's caught, particularly in Act 4, between what Capulet wants and what Juliet wants. And she's clearly in despair. She thinks marrying Paris is not a bad idea, but marrying Paris in 24 hours from now is a crazy idea. So I think we see a woman really, really caught without any agency, and that's a part of the tragedy of the play. So it'd be great if she could have helped her, but no one's really given her the tools to do that.
Fantastic, thank you. So this question in from Agnes, again, a question to all of you. It'd be great to get all of your thoughts about this. Why do you think Juliet has no fear of sinning when committing suicide, yet is so worried about sinning when told to marry Paris? Maybe let's leave Karen till the end and come to somebody else about this question.
There's a really interesting line which we just did in the scene we just did, which I mean, I must have heard, but it rang true again to me, where she says, God joined our hearts and thou our hands. So she thinks God, has said, you two should meet each other at this party, you two should speak, you two should fall in love. That's what God decided. So to then go against that would be going against God. Yeah. That thing happened first. Now you're saying to me, I have to marry somebody else. Well, God said to us, we should be in love. It must be God. We often think this, I think. When you fall in love with somebody like that, you go, oh, it was meant to be. So she believes that. She believes in God. So whatever decision she makes, she's going to go against God. She's already made a promise in front of me, in front of Romeo, in front of God, to be married and be in love. She can't go back on that promise. I think actually she shows how incredibly, for want of a better word, religious she is, how much faith she has in what God has decided.
I'd only add to that there's a kind of honesty in Juliet. So they are very different. To desire to end it because you cannot see a way out might be sinful according to the letter of your religion, but it's honest about how you feel. To marry Paris is to do something dishonest. She doesn't love him and can't imagine ever loving him. And I think that means a lot to her, that honesty.
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, that's such a massive question. Absolutely brilliant question. Yeah. Sort of just adding on again, because I think I agree with all of that. I think it just gets to a stage where she just knows it's what she must do.
Right.
And if no one else is going to help her, she's got to break through, and that's what's extraordinary about it, is that she must get to that end point, and soon everything else that she's supposed to be doing, whether it's heaven or earth, sort of like disintegrates so she can get to this end point.
Fantastic, thank you. So again, this is a question to everyone about the language, and this is from the Bolsover School. Is there, age-old question, an easy way to break down Shakespeare's language so we can understand what the characters are saying? So I guess we've seen some of those techniques already today, but whether, Erica, you'd like to open that up a little bit more and discuss that.
This might seem like a very simple answer, but it isn't really. The best way to do it is to say it. Mm-hmm. Because I think when we're listening to it and we're aware sometimes when we're reading it or we're studying it of the words we don't recognise, or the words that we are unfamiliar to us, or the structure of a line because of the verse doesn't seem like it makes sense immediately, the best way to get inside it is to say it yourself. To think about what you do know about the characters, which is what we've been doing today, to look at the words that you do recognise, and then to try saying it. And quite often in rehearsals, we might start that way before we say, what does it mean, what does it mean? We'll say it aloud. So the moment we were looking at with Phoebus and Phaeton, very few of us use those words in our lives, probably none of us anymore. But as Karen was saying, once you've said it a few times, you feel this forward movement. So then when you might need to go and look some things up and go, okay, that's the god of the sun, you can make use of that when you say it next. So speaking it to each other, asking each other what you think it might mean, and not being afraid, because quite a lot of these words are really familiar, really straightforward, and what gets in our way is that we're a bit anxious about it. So if we can speak it and listen to it and get used to it, that's the best way to understand it.
Can I just, I think that's exactly right. Just to add on to that, Shakespeare would have expected it to just be said. He didn't write. I mean, we have all the books now, but he wouldn't have written it to go, and now we're going to sell this in the shops. It was just to be said. So the more you can say it out loud in your classrooms to each other, I think that's dead right. But also, I think we think because it's Shakespeare, we have to understand all of it. But it's like a lot of art forms, like jazz or rap music. You know, there's lots of words where you just go, I'm not sure what that means. I might have to investigate what that slang word might mean. But you get the sense, you get the emotional sense, you get the attitude, and that's the important thing. You might not know what Phaeton or Phoebus means, but you know that person's in trouble. That's enough. Or you know that person loves that person, or you know that person's angry with that person. That's enough. As long as you get the sense of the story, you are fine.
Brilliant, thank you. And another question in from Victoria Page School, and this is from Bronte. How did you, let's go to Karen, how did you prepare for portraying your character? What did you do beforehand?
Oh gosh, there was lots of different ways I went into it. The main thing was, for me, was I sort of made a little collection of lots of different women in my life that I know, and sort of monitored them or thought about them. So I've got a cousin who's a teenager, so quite often I would think back to her and how she would behave in certain moments to make it realistic to teenagers today as I possibly could. I was just think, okay, so if I was my cousin, how would she react to this? But then there was loads of different ways going into that. I looked at Queen Victoria a lot, because strangely she has a lot of similarities of sort of not being allowed to function in a normal life, being sort of heir to the throne sort of things. Explored a lot of women, really.
And another question, sort of coming on from that, this is from Maxie. Thank you, Maxie. You said Juliet was only 13 years old, but she seems much older. Do modern performances lose the sense of her young age, vulnerability and immaturity? Fantastic question.
That's really good. I suppose they can. I met a friend who went, oh, so how was the show? And chatting away, and he went, so how old did you pitch her? It's sort of like, what age did you want to make her? I suppose because it's so, it's tricky, isn't it? Because, I don't know how many authentically 13-year-olds have done that part, but a thing that sort of released it for me is Erica in rehearsals saying to me, and Bally, who played Romeo, I want you to not think about the age ever again. So it didn't necessarily have to worry too much about that. I think it was more about the thought process being sort of accurate to that age.
There was also, sorry, Erica, there was another thing which you mentioned, which was that she doesn't really have that many friends of her age. She hangs around an awful lot of adults, and Karen said that she suspected that she would read a lot all the time. So there's this person who hangs around adults, and you know, children are sponges. So if they're hanging around adults, and particularly in a household which may be a little bit fraught, might be, you know, and then you've got the nurse who's incredibly garrulous, talks an awful lot as being the person you hang out with a lot. That might make you think or feel emotionally in a state far more mature than we would imagine a 13-year-old would be.
I suppose the only thing I would add to that is, again, boringly, it is in the words. So we know that Shakespeare took two sources for Romeo and Juliet, of a poem and a story that very closely matched this. And in both of those, Juliet was older, so was sort of 16 or 18. He chose to make her not quite 14. And I think what he wants us to do is go, that's very young to be put in this situation and to be married off. And he wants us to find that scandalous and then discover that actually she's astonishingly mature. And we've been very lucky in making the production because we work with lots of young people in lots of the schools that the RSC connects with. And they were in the prologue with us. And my experience, actually, of young women who are 13, 14, is that they feel, inside their heads and hearts, much older than 13 or 14. And I remember that from being that age. So I think Shakespeare has got inside the idea that you might look young on the outside, but inside you feel like you know everything, and that the adults are often wrong.
Fantastic, thank you. So this is the last question to again, all three of you. So the question is from St Aloysius College. How do you prepare the actors emotionally for a scene like Act 4, Scene 1? How do you get that preparation there?
I mean, it was difficult to do every night. I suppose the second act for my character, it's sort of dramatic all the way through, so I almost didn't have to think about it too much because it was such a roller coaster of terrible thing happening after terrible thing after terrible thing. It sort of took it, you got dragged along with it. But for me, if I was ever in any doubt, it was just trying to listen as much as possible, to listen and feel what that actually meant. It was, and when you feel different every day, it's always going to be changeable, but that's okay.
It is a trap, I think, sometimes, to try and think to yourself, well, in this scene here, I must feel this. I remember just before I would come onto that scene, trying to go, I don't know what's happened. I don't know what Juliet's going to do to me. I don't know what she's going to say. I'm just coming into the scene and I'm having a conversation with Paris. And then Karen, Juliet, says what she says, and she's right. That listening, acting is often really mostly reacting to the person that's speaking to you. So that listening and reacting and just going, oh, you make me feel like that. And sometimes, of course, you are tired and you go, I don't feel like. But there were often times in rehearsals where unexpectedly, certainly myself, I would find myself very emotional, you know, just because you're listening, and those wonderful words, you know, they do affect you.
I think one of the skills required to speak Shakespeare is to, exactly as these two say, to be very available to it, because in some modern text or text that we might see in a film, the emotion sometimes happens when you're not speaking, like it does in life, where we can't speak because we feel something. With verse, actually it has to happen as you say it, which means it has to happen as you hear it, and almost as you hear yourself say it. So you have to be very present and pretty quick thinking. But then when you do that, if you, as you say, you sort of surrender to that, it does an awful lot to you to make you take you where it needs to take you.
Thank you so much, all three of you. Some fantastic answers and some fantastic questions from everyone in your classroom. Thank you for letting us into your rehearsal room and just sharing this brilliant insight into how you get the text up on its feet. Now, I know some of you have been having technical difficulties. Don't worry, we will edit the live lesson and put it out on the RSC website soon, so you can see any bits that you have missed. For everyone watching, we have a new website called the RSC Shakespeare Learning Zone for 11 to 18-year-olds. This URL is on your screen now, so do have a look at it. It's to help you really understand Shakespeare, whether you're doing homework or coursework or revising for exams. There are key scenes, plot summaries, and videos of RSC actors and directors to help you explore the play. To access the website, go to the address that I said is up on your screens now. Thank you everyone for joining us, and look out everyone for your name in the credits.